to rewrite history. Rafe, what's your take?
Well, not only is it unethical, it's also dangerous, and I would say it's dangerous on a cultural and civilizational level, no less.
And what about you, Stephen?
I think we're actually getting to a very serious stage now. I think the joking has stopped. I think the fun is over. We're now talking about something very, very serious, which is divisive and corrosive for society. And I think we need to actually put a marker down here and now.
But before all of that, it's the latest news headlines.
Very good evening to you. It is 7 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The 6 people who died after their boat got into difficulties in the Channel this morning were all Afghan men. And that is according to French prosecutors, who've said the majority of the migrants on board, including some children, were from Afghanistan, along with several from Sudan. A criminal inquiry has been opened in France. The RNLI and the French Coast Guard rescued more than 50 people from the vessel, some of whom were taken to Dover. Around 200 police officers and staff in Northern Ireland were not informed that a laptop and documents containing their names had been stolen for almost a month. The theft from a car in early July emerged last week after the names of 10,000 police employees were published online in a separate data breach on Tuesday. A group set up to assess the risk to officers caused by the breach has had more than 600 referrals. Chief Constable Simon Byrne says he's deeply sorry and the service is working hard to stop third parties from attempting to cause harm to serving officers. The King says he's utterly horrified to hear at least 80 people have died as a result of wildfires in Hawaii. King Charles sent a message of condolence to the President of the United States, saying he's sending his deepest sympathies to the families of those who've tragically lost their lives. Authorities say that number of 80 is set to rise dramatically, with hundreds of people still unaccounted for. Fresh evacuations are underway as fires continue to burn on the northwest coast of Maui, and questions are being asked about whether residents were warned quickly enough. Hawaii's Attorney General has opened a comprehensive review into how authorities responded to the fires. The Duke of Sussex has played a polo match raising money for HIV sufferers in honour of his late mother. It was also in aid of his charity, Sintabale, which he co-founded to help African children affected by inequality, poverty and HIV/AIDS. Prince Harry played against Singapore Polo Club, captained by the charity's ambassador and his friend, Nacho Figueras. Princess Diana pioneered efforts to challenge the stigma around the disease back in the 1980s. England have beaten Colombia 2-1 to reach the semi-finals of the Women's World Cup. Goals from Lauren Hemp and Alessia Russo helped the Lionesses come from behind after Colombia took the lead. They'll now face the co-hosts, Australia, on the 16th of August. And fragments of meteors that could be as small as a grain of sand travelling at 130,000 miles per hour will light up the sky tonight. The annual summer meteor shower has been active since July and will continue until the 24th of this month, but it's thought to reach its peak tonight. The Royal Observatory of Greenwich is recommending watching between midnight and 5:30 a.m. when light pollution is at its lowest. This is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now, that's it from me. Now it's over to the next programme.
The Inns of Court have historical and national significance that cannot really be overstated, but is often overlooked. They've taught the common law to generation upon generation of English barristers for hundreds of years. Lincoln's Inn has been doing so since the 1400s. In fact, John Fortescue, arguably one of the greatest political thinkers of the 15th century, was governor of Lincoln's Inn not once, but 3 times. These institutions have a duty to justice, of course, but they also have another duty too, as the privileged custodians of an historical inheritance that they hold in trust on behalf of the rest of us. Unfortunately, many of those in positions of authority throughout our institutions, they seem to think that they own the place. That is why the decisions taken by institutions like Lincoln's Inn are our business. This week, it has been reported that Lincoln's Inn have decided to abandon the explicitly Christian wording of grace before meals to make it more, quote, inclusive. The Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Voss, Master of the Rolls and Treasurer of the Inn, said it's a priority to continue to enhance the relevance of the Inn to all our members and build an increasingly inclusive environment. This will involve taking the time to correct outdated stereotypes. Hate is a strong word, I know, but I hate that tyrannical, controlling little word, relevance. As if hundreds of years of tradition that shaped and formed your institution with its own hands should be bossed about by something as whimsical and transient as one little cabal's idea of relevance. Grace is outdated, so now they're going to give thanks instead. This is the original. Lord God, Heavenly Father, bless us in these thy gifts which we receive from thy bountiful goodness, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Now, they will say, in this moment of silence, let us give thanks for all that we are about to receive and for the company of this honourable society. This is asinine, ungrateful rubbish. There will be some people who think that I'm overreacting, of course, but the reality is that this is a Christian country that has a distinctively Christian history. Every fibre of its being, of our being, whether you're Christian or not, has been shaped by its theology, culture, values, ethics, and worldview, including the common law itself. Erasing Christian elements from our institutions in the name of relevance and inclusivity is illiterate. They are wrong to think that upholding the traditions of our institutions are incompatible with being welcoming. It shows how little they understand the culture and traditions that they're attacking, the culture and traditions that gave birth to the free societies and liberties that we enjoy today. I know I sound like a broken record, but those impositions of authority in our institutions are taking an axe to whatever they like, but these things are not theirs to destroy. All men took too lightly, and all that they loved too late. Those are the immortal words of G.K. Chesterton. These things belong to England, not just to her history, but to her future as well. They belong to you, to us, to you at home, wherever you come from. G.K. Chesterton put it best when he said, tradition means giving a vote to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. All Democrats object to men being disqualified by the accident of their birth. Tradition objects to their being disqualified by the accident of their death. Democracy tells us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our groom. Tradition asks us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our father. I think that by rejecting their traditions, Lincoln's Inn are inflicting an injustice. But what do you think? In the news this week, curators of the world's most extensive collection of Tudor objects, the Mary Rose Museum, have been heavily criticised. They've been ascribing questionable LGBT origins to objects found on Henry VIII's famous ship, or, as they put it, using queerness as an interpretive tool. For example, the museum website argues that a mirror found on the ship can relate to queer people as they may experience gender dysphoria or euphoria when looking into it. And a collection of Nick combs is linked to gender identity because of the norm that women have long hair and men have short hair. These interpretations are, to put it charitably, hugely speculative, forcing the present onto the past and distorting it into a fiction. That led me to wonder, is it unethical for museum curators to rewrite the past? And that is the subject of tonight's duel. Joining me tonight is the broadcaster Rafe Hadel-Mancu and the former MP Stephen Pound, two of my favourite people. How lucky am I? Rafe and Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here today.
How lucky are we, actually?
So, Stephen, kick us off. Do you think that this is not just wrong, but unethical?
Yeah, well, I think this is profoundly wrong, and I think we've actually reached a stage now where we simply have to say this far and no further. I think we are actually, this is asinine, it is puerile, it's also inchoate, it makes no sense whatsoever. Look, let's get a couple of things straight. They've actually found a mirror. Well, I have to say, that doesn't mean necessarily that the place was full of gay men preening in the mirror. There's a lot of women on board Henrikian warships. You know the expression show a leg? You know where that comes from, don't you?
I don't.
Well, because the women would be in the hammock, with a sailor overnight, and in the morning, when you piped all hands on deck, they used to say, show a leg to see if it was a man or a woman in the hammock, or sometimes...
See, that would have been an interesting bit of history for them to include.
Well, that would be interesting. But the other thing is about men having long hair. Henrikian sailors, right up until the Nelsonian times, had very long hair. The reason that we wear that collar, that Nelson collar, was to keep the the tallow off our uniforms. And we used to I mean, not in my day, I have to say, but, ancestors used to do that. So, but look, what's ridiculous about this is about trying to identify and find queerness. And I think you put it beautifully earlier on when you talked about people detached from reality. If you can afford to live up on the top of the hill, doesn't mean you occupy the moral high ground. And these people are actually twisting themselves and tying themselves into knots to desperately try to justify their own prejudices and their own failings, their own academic incompetence. I don't mind them doing that. They can do that in any dinner party in Dartmouth Park for all they care. But I object to what they're doing to our country, to our people, to our culture and to our standards, and actually making us look as though we are somehow guilty for not identifying gay sailors on the Mary Rose. Well, I'll go to my grave defending the right of gay men to be gay and gay women to be gay women, but I'm not going to say if there's a mirror there, that equals, 2/3 of the ship's crew were of that persuasion.
Rafe, they are reading into this, aren't they? So there is surely a history that they could have actually highlighted, but this is something that they are reading into it, that they are imposing on the past. But they would say that the reason why they're doing this is for inclusivity, so that people can see themselves in the collection. Do you think that people should need to see themselves in the collection?
No, I mean, well, it was quite clear that I would be very open and happy to see an exhibition about the history of homosexuality, whether it be, James I are all favourites, or the Molly houses of the 17th century in London, and, the history of Polari, because that's real history. What we're talking about here is fantasy history. The very notion of queerness is a 20th century creation. Queerness is a very political term. It's loaded. It's the advancement of an ideology and of an activism, which is very different to just being gay. So that's one of the key issues I have here. But on its own, this is a very silly story, I would say. But taken more broadly, this is very sinister. This is the attempt to subvert reality, to advance a political agenda, and I think we have to actually call a spade here. Britain is a post-revolutionary society now. We may not have red flags flying from the tops of our grand buildings, but the people who inhabit those buildings and run them are cuckoos in the nest who bear no resemblance to the generations who built them and ran them. And our museums are actually at the core and centre of this, and the biggest cuckoos are actually museum curators and librarians. When we were growing up, librarians and museum curators were shy, introverted, meek people. They're now the stormtroopers of woke ideology. And the problem here, of course, is that children today get so little history at school. They know about the Tudors, they know about the Nazis and Windrush. Beyond that, they don't get anything. So it's museums that provide the main educational service, not just for the young, but also for the adults. British adults are very ignorant of history too. But instead of providing the accurate and balanced history they should be giving, they are reinforcing the indoctrination that children are getting at school.
Do you think that's the problem, Stephen, that we don't even have the resilience in the population in terms of historical literacy to be able to recognise lies when we see them? So it's the same with Lincoln's Inn, that there's a kind of illiteracy there. There's no understanding of why these things are important and why, from a Christian perspective, I know you're also a Christian, why honesty matters.
I think that one thing Christianity teaches you is self-examination. And one thing is because we live our lives in imitation of Christ, hopefully, but we also need to examine our own motivations and our own urges and our own motivations. And I think that Lincoln's Inn, and let's not forget, you talked about Fortescue, and I think only on GBNews can we have a discussion about St John Fortescue. But I'd also mention St Thomas More, who was also at Lincoln's Inn, who actually died for his faith and died to preserve the independence of the judiciary. I think that we don't have that strength anymore, and we've allowed those with the louded voices to dominate too much. And because you can shout louder doesn't mean that you can actually express yourself better. I wish we had more confidence, but as for the shy librarian, I can think of probably one of the greatest poets of the last century was a shy librarian in Hull who spent most of his life. Philip Larkin, who was certainly not a quiet librarian.
Brief final thoughts, Ray?
No, well, I agree, but I think we have to wake up to the fact that what's happening here is systemic across all of our institutions, and we need to have a muscular defence of Western civilization to defend us from the enemies within, but also from without, of course, because we have very strong aggressors in China and Russia and elsewhere, and it's only strength that defeats strength.
Thank you both for a very intelligent disagreement.
Well, I'm sorry.
Or not really disagreement, an intelligent agreement.
I will try to find something to argue about with Ray.
Thank you so very much, both of you, for
well moderated,
there.
Emma.
Now, earlier this week, a police force defended creating a meme on social media telling the public that a criminal had been sent to prison. Lancashire police posted a how it started versus how it's going meme using 2 photographs of a criminal who had recently been convicted alongside 14 other men. So I'm asking X, formerly known as Twitter, should the police make social media memes? Answer, no, they should stick to their job, or yes, it's only a bit of fun. There's still about 10 minutes to go when you can vote, and then we'll take a look at the results later in the show. Plenty more to come on my Common Sense Crusade. Next, we'll be joined by journalist and author Tim Stanley to discuss whether Christianity could be the remedy to toxic gender ideology.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Emma Webb. You might have seen an article this week by Tim Stanley under the headline, "New Atheists Allowed the Trans Cult to Begin. Christianity Can Now End It." Prominent heroes of the New Atheist movement are now finding themselves standing shoulder to shoulder with those that they once criticised in defence of biological gender. But did they contribute to the problem by toppling Christianity? Tim says, and this is a quote, "It's the consequence of tearing up the old maps by which we once lived, inviting us to plot our own chaotic routes to nowhere." Well, I am delighted to say that we are joined now down the line by Tim Stanley. Thank you, Tim, so much for joining us tonight. So first, can you tell us a bit more about your view on why we should pin the blame on the New Atheist movement for this?
I'm not blaming the New Atheist movement exclusively, but New Atheism was a movement that emerged about 15 years ago that took atheism to a new evangelical level. It was hyper-rationalist, and it sold the idea to many people that there was really nothing sane about religion, that if you just accept some of the most basic premises of religion, then you're immediately sucked into a world of madness and fundamentalism. And I think this had a big impact upon a generation of young people, my generation. I know a lot of people who agreed with New Atheism were drawn into it. And what happened was that meant that it tore up many of the traditional teachings that they might have been raised in, made them very skeptical of them, among which are attitudes towards gender, like it's all driven by biology, the idea of God creating man and woman, that their design bequeaths them a purpose and things like that. So you have a generation who tore up those old maps, as I said, and were now invited to plot a new one, which sounds very exciting, and it was liberating. But the problem with atheism is that atheism only ever takes something away. It doesn't replace the belief that came before with a new belief structure. And if you look at the New Atheist movement, a significant number, possibly a majority, went on to become very left-wing and very woke. And that actually makes perfect sense, because if there's no God up there, you tend to become rather more introspective. You focus upon yourself instead. And I think that a generation who had shrugged off those old ideas about how life is governed by biology or by God or by old books tended to become a little more introspective. And I think that made them prey to new questions about gender, which I think have had a huge impact upon our culture.
Do you think that this is sort of fundamentally a rationalist problem? So even though Richard Dawkins is now arguing in favour of biology, as I said, shoulder to shoulder with the people that he once criticised, he was recently filmed in an interview talking about trans ideology in terms of transubstantiation. So do you think that Christianity is really the missing element here, that the thing that can make sense of both the problem that we face but also can offer the solution is fundamentally Christianity?
Yeah, I don't want to go down this cul-de-sac, but his comparison of trans and transubstantiation really exposes a basic problem with the New Atheists, which is they never bothered to understand religion. And they didn't look in particular at its relationship with science. They had this idea in their head that you have a choice, faith or science. The reality is very different. Over 2,000 years, just to take the Western case, Christianity has, yes, sometimes pushed back against science. It's also engaged with science, and it's been changed by science. So most mainstream Christian denominations today, for example, accept some form of evolution as a proven fact. So they misunderstood the nature of science, and by doing that, they conjured a tension between religion and science, which not only wasn't there, but it denied them an ally, a useful ally. Because one thing that Richard Dawkins is now finding is that what he has in common with Christians is we take biology seriously. Christians would say, obviously, that biology was shaped by God, but either way, they would say being a man or a woman is a physical reality, and it shapes the person. And that's what science says as well about genetics, that when it comes to being male or female, your sex is encoded in your genes. They would say it's the product of thousands of years of evolution. Christians might say it's something to do with the breath of God. Whatever, the point is they take it seriously. Whereas the postmodernists, the very left-wing people, the ultra-liberal, the woke, they believe in a kind of dualism, a tension between mind and body, which says that ultimately my mind, how I feel, is more important than the material, physical reality around me. In fact, I can change that reality with surgery. That's a real philosophical difference between wokeism on one hand and actually Richard Dawkins-style atheists and Christians, on the other hand. We take biology very seriously.
Now, very briefly, Tim, before we go to my panel, some people would say that Christianity can't offer a solution because Christianity is, particularly in this country, is facing a general decline. Do you think that Christianity still has something to offer to us as a society in terms of a solution to this, despite that general decline?
I don't know if it's got something to offer to us as a society, because I think we're unwilling to engage with it on a cultural level. Although a lot of politicians are religious, I'd say that proportionally Parliament is more religious than the rest of the country. I think they're very frightened of approaching religion. They think it puts people off. And I think Britain has sadly turned a cultural corner whereby it's very difficult to imagine it having some kind of grand religious reawakening. But I would say on an individual by individual basis, I believe Christianity to be true, but I also think it's useful. I think it's useful because it's true. This thing is secular, but nonetheless, I think it has, I don't want to say pat answers, because that gives the impression that you sign up to something, you read a book, and suddenly you're transformed. It's not like that. But to go back to the language you used at the beginning of the segment about maps, it offers you a map through life. It says, here's what you were created for, here's the purpose, here's the relationship you're trying to build with God and with other people, and here's a whole ethical code that goes with it, and 2,000 years of magnificent culture for you to play around in. So in a society which has shrugged so much off and which has got a big void at the center of it, Christianity can help fill that void.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off there and bring in my panel. Rafe, what do you think of this? Do you think that Christianity, despite the general decline, can offer a solution?
Well, we have to define which version of Christianity we're talking about. Is it Anglicanism? Is it Catholicism? If it's Anglicanism, is it the Anglicanism of Justin Welby or of the African bishops? Justin Welby has, is the grand poobah of woke.
His quote, Christianity
is it the Is it the Catholicism of Pope Francis or of Pope Benedict? I mean, we need to define what we're talking about there. I think it's a bit too much to say that the new atheists are to blame for a lot of this. The void existed long before the new atheists arose. The new atheists use that void to echo their own voices. I think if you are going to bring down woke, it needs to be a multi-pronged attack from secularists, from all religious, from the traditional left and the high Tory right. Everyone needs to bring it down, just like the great democracies and communists allied in the Second World War.
What do you think?
Well, I think it was On Dover Beach was written, about 150 years ago, and it talked about the slow, melancholic, withdrawing roar. And it's obviously the analogy is of Christianity moving from Europe. But I think that what annoys me about Richard Dawkins, I was supposed to be at a conference with him once, but as I couldn't see him, I didn't believe he was there. But the problem is that there's a lack of humility amongst atheists, and there's an inherent arrogance, because the idea that we are supreme beings individually, I think, is profoundly wrong, and theologically nonsensical, and biologically ridiculous. You have to have the humility to recognise that there is a greater and a higher force. And I think that's what makes us Christians, or believers. Perhaps we can even use that expression, because I can understand the vociferous nature of the various religious groups. But look, I think the issue of ideology is one that we probably don't have the 6.5 hours to even scratch the surface of. But what we can at least agree is that there is an urge in every single society since the dawn of time to actually look towards a higher force, towards a greater power. Whether we call it religion or theology or philosophy, whatever, it's always been there. It's inherent within us, and that ain't going anywhere.
That ain't going anywhere. That's the final thought there from Stephen Pound. Thank you so much, Tim Stanley, for joining us. And also thank you very much to my panel for your comments. Plenty more to come on My Common Sense Crusade. Next, we'll be joined by the former cop turned campaigner, Harry Miller, after another disastrous week for the police's PR. First, though, it's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Marco Patagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll see a mixed bag of weather across the UK over the next few days. There'll be some sunshine, but some rain too. But things will be turning warmer, certainly towards the middle part of the coming week. Low pressure's anchored towards the northwest of the UK at the moment. That's feeding a fair few showers in on the southwesterly breeze. And we'll need to keep an eye on this little feature running in from the southwest. That'll bring some more rain on Sunday night into Monday. Back to tonight, though, it's a case of clear spells and showers. The most frequent showers towards the north and west of the UK, some of them fairly heavy towards the northwest of Scotland. In the best of the clear spells down towards the southeast, temperatures holding up fairly well, actually, at 15 or 16 degrees, and falling no lower than 13 or 14 towards the north and northwest. As for Sunday, well, it's a day of sunshine and showers. The showers most frequent and most widespread on Sunday towards the north and northeast of the UK. A few heavy, perhaps even thundery ones around here. Whereas towards the south and east, it's a brighter picture, plenty of sunny spells around. And with lighter winds than on Saturday, it should feel a bit warmer out and about, temperatures peaking at 23 Celsius, 73 in Fahrenheit. Monday, there looks like being a pretty unsettled day across England and Wales. Outbreaks of quite heavy, potentially thundery rain working in from the southwest as we go through the day. Whereas towards the north and northwest, it's a day of sunshine and showers once again. And temperatures peaking in the high teens to low 20s, 23 down towards the southeast is 73 in Fahrenheit. Warming up though as we head toward the middle of the week, we could even see 30 degrees in one or two spots.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Emma Webb. I am sure that you have seen the video of an autistic teenager being dragged screaming from her house after commenting that a female officer looked like her lesbian nana. In case you missed it, here is a clip of that distressing video.
Where's this? Does it go to right under there?
She's autistic. She don't like people touching her.
Well,
she will have a meltdown.
What's your name?
The police officers who arrested the girl have been accused of a callous overreaction. The girl's mother has explained that her daughter was having panic attacks from being touched by them and that they continued to manhandle her. She has also denied that the comment was homophobic. But they're not the only force kicking up a scandal this week. The Lancashire Police Department has received criticism for a meme that they created on a social media post. Lancashire Police's account tweeted two pictures, the first holding of the criminal holding a large amount of cash and the second of his mugshot. The caption read, "How it started, how it's going," which is a popular meme format, usually illustrating a fall from grace. With a seemingly endless string of controversies and a record high of 95% of crimes going unsolved, I actually couldn't believe that when I saw the statistic, is it time to ask, are the police out of control? Let's put that question to former officer turned campaigner from the organisation We Are Fair Cop, Harry Miller. Thank you so much for joining us, Harry. So firstly, Harry, I want to first ask you, Harry, about that meme. When I first saw that, I couldn't really believe that they'd done it. I thought it was so inappropriate. What do you think was going through their minds?
I don't think anything's going through their minds. The social media accounts of police forces are being run by 7-year-olds. It's quite obvious. They get the law wrong. They use childish memes. They don't respond. If you challenge them, they either answer back sharply or they have a strop and run away and won't talk to you. The entire social media output of most of Britain's police forces needs shutting down and starting again. What the police need to do, if they're going to use social media, and of course they should use social media, is engage properly as adults with the public. They shouldn't be resorting to this lowest common denominator, absolute trash that we're seeing on a daily basis. We'd get rid of the children and get the adults back in the room.
Now, I know that you also have some very strong views on the arrest of this young autistic teenager. You mentioned before in previous interviews and online, you said that it's not possible to commit a public order offence in your own home. And now, of course, the police have released her without charge. What do you think the problem is here? Is this a problem of police training, that they don't understand the law, that they don't know how to behave professionally?
All of those things. But in Britain, ignorance as to law is no excuse. You can call this what we watched yesterday as police overreach. I don't think it is overreach at all. I think what we witnessed was a criminal act. I think what we witnessed was a kidnapping. And I will tell you why, Emma. There are 4 points to a kidnapping. First of all, it's the taking of one person by another. Secondly, it involves force. Thirdly, it has to be against the person's will. And fourthly, it has to be done without lawful excuse. Now, the simple fact is, what the police did this week fits that criteria. And it's no good the West Yorkshire Police saying lessons have been learned, etc. No, the general members of the public can't get away with that excuse. If you fulfill the criteria for a kidnap, you should be arrested and charged with kidnap. And that's what needs to happen with these officers. They need to be charged for a criminal offence.
So I've got a statement here from the police force, and so this isn't the latest statement. In the latest statement, they say that they've decided to take no further action against the girl, but that they do appreciate the, as they say, understandable sensitivities around incidents involving young people and neurodiversity. Now, in a previous statement, they did say, we are aware of a video circulating on social media, which, as is often the case, only provides a limited snapshot of the circumstances of this incident. We have received a complaint in relation to the incident, which is currently being assessed by West Yorkshire Professional Standards Directorate. Now, I think, Harry, that in order to clear up any confusion around the context of this, that the police force should release their body cam footage. What do you think?
I don't think we need to. Their statement said that the alleged homophobic comment was made within a domestic dwelling. There is no such offence. There is no such public order offence, Section 4 or Section 5, within a domestic dwelling. It's as simple as that. We don't need to see any further context at all. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because, of course, they've dropped all charges. They've dropped all interest in the poor girl, because there was no basis whatsoever for the arrest. It was an entirely unlawful arrest. But I would contend that it was a criminal activity. A criminal activity. This was not professional failure. This was criminal activity. And the reason for that is because our police constables, our police forces have been infiltrated by the likes of Stonewall, the likes of Mermaids, the likes of Pride, They've aligned themselves with a political movement. And their point is that providing they're on the right side of history, they don't give a damn if they're on the wrong side of the law. And it's time that they were held to account. And it's no good simply putting them through professional standards. People need to get in front of a judge, these coppers in front of a judge, and they need stripping of their constabularyship, and they need sacking, and they need putting in jail. It's as simple as that.
Thank you very much. That was Harry Miller. Now I'm going to go to my panel now, but first I'm going to reread that police statement. They said, "We are aware of a video circulating on social media, which, as is often the case, only provides a very limited snapshot of the circumstances of this incident." And now, as I say, in the more recent statement, they've said that they have released the girl without charge. So they said that this has led them to a decision to take no further action. So do you think, Stephen, that the police are out of control?
Absolutely not. I don't. And I think that we actually need to look at this in the round. Firstly, the 7 police officers didn't turn up at her house. The young woman was actually originally detained under a public order offence in the public area. She'd been on for a night out. And we also don't know whether the woman, the police officer with the short blonde hair, who was accused of looking like the lesbian Nana, we don't know what her feelings were. Maybe she was offended by that. But I think what we have to recognise is we must see the whole thing in the round. And I agree with I don't always agree with the Lancashire Police. I certainly don't always agree with the Metropolitan Police as a citizen of the metropolis. But believe you me, this is one thing taken out of context. What are the police officers doing in the house? What is the back history? How did the young woman come from being on the street outside a nightclub into the house? What is the full story about this? Then we can talk about it. But the trouble is, I think it actually detracts from some of the real terrifying problems we do have in the police, like you touched on with those memes and those emojis earlier on.
Very quickly, Rafe, this public order offence that she was arrested for, this happened in a private dwelling anyway, but regardless of that fact, should it be illegal to say that someone looks like your lesbian Nana?
Well, it depends on context. I mean, why is that an offence? You know, I would say it's rather homophobic to suggest that looking like a lesbian is a bad thing. I mean, you have to think about it in that context too. And, you know, back in the old days, Dixon or Doc Green were just giving you a clip around the ear hole if you said something offensive to that person. But what an infuriating state we're in now with our police force in this situation. I think it's absolutely appalling. We've got, you know, Harry Miller being arrested. We've got this poor girl having police after her. Meanwhile, we've got the mass rape of young girls also in Yorkshire going unchecked by Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. If someone burgles your house, you won't get a policeman for love nor money, but call someone a lesbian and the police will be round faster than you can say Martina Navratilova.
Thank you so much to Harry Miller again, and thank you also to my duelists for joining me throughout the whole show. Your contributions this evening have been wonderful and intelligent, as always. So thank you very much to you both. Let's take a final break, and then we will look at what you have to say about today's topics. Oh, sorry, we're going to look at what you've said about today's topics already. Harry says, the police are a disgrace, our streets are lawless, and they are posting jokes on their social media accounts and intimidating scared autistic children. Jen says, without God, there is no purpose. This is why Britain's children are so lost. Yeah. Beth says, I feel like the museum story has been blown out of proportion. It was just a blog post. It really is a great museum with a great display. Now, I don't doubt that that's the case, but I think it's very important, the sorts of stuff that they're teaching people about their collections. So, coming up on the final part of my Common Sense Crusade this week, we'll be joined by Professor Eric Kaufmann to discuss corporate environmental, social and governance, or ESG, and something called B Corp. And I'll be asking whether this poses a threat to freedom of speech and religion. Stay tuned.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa, whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians left her task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
After seeing Lancashire police reporting crimes via a meme format, I took to Twitter and asked, should police make social media memes? 92.6% of you agree with us the police should not make social media memes to report crimes, while only 7.4% of you think that they should and that it's just a bit of fun. Well, that's very interesting. I think that's quite a sound response from you all. Thank you very much for your votes. You'll be aware that by now that the bank Coutts was recently under fire for closing the account of GB News presenter Nigel Farage because they didn't agree with his political views. And as it turned out, this was by no means an isolated incident. Coutts, like many businesses, are signed up to be regulated by environmental, social and governance principles. ESG, as it's known, is a set of standards that a company is ranked on, requiring companies to set net zero targets and promote social justice. Now, you may not have heard of something called B Corp, but over 1,400 UK companies are signed up to it, including Coutts. B Corp accredits companies who meet their environmental and social justice criteria. You might have heard of equality, diversity and inclusion policies, but B Corp takes it a step further by adding a J for social justice at the beginning, JEDI principles. This week, it's been reported that they are campaigning for something called the Better Business Act. This legislation would require companies to serve not their shareholders' interests, but a purpose: climate and social justice. The potential threat to our individual freedom has been compared to China's social credit system. As we move to an increasingly cashless society, does this pose a threat to freedom of speech and religion? I'm joined now by politics professor Eric Kaufmann. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric. Can we begin with an explanation from you? What exactly is ESG and B Corp? Because people might not have heard of it.
Right. Well, what this essentially is a corporate kite marking organization, similar to if you've heard of Stonewall or Mermaids, and they get companies to sign up to a set of pledges, which are essentially a veiled form of cultural left politics. Once companies sign up to these pledges, they are then kind of bound by these pledges. And so, for example, you could see because Coutts Bank was signed up to these pledges, they actually used in their rationale for debanking Farage the B Corp membership. So what you can see is this sort of ratcheting effect where these kite-marking organizations manage to twist the arms of major organizations to carry out their political agenda. And that's really what we're facing with this ESG. I should say, by the way, that this is part of a broader pattern that we've seen in the US, we've seen it here, of a kind of stealth campaign by the cultural left to sort of essentially infiltrate many organizations. So it starts with a very innocuous phase. It could be inclusion, could be affirmative actions, which sounds good on the surface. But then what happens is once companies and organizations sign up to this, it leads to a process that winds up in radicalization and critical race theory and radical gender theory being pushed in diversity training and people being taught to hate Britain as some kind of a racist country. All of this follows, but you don't see it on the tin. On the tin, it just says something nice like people and the planet. Once you get into the practicalities of it, it's compelled speech. Oh, you don't have a view that aligns with our values? Sorry, you're going to have to be fired or we're going to silence you. So, yeah, it's definitely a threat to speech.
Well, they want to, as part of these recommendations by B Corp, what they want to do is, firstly, to introduce some legislation on this. But they also, part of that is affirmative action, so hiring people according to certain, quote, identity quotas. Is that not incompatible with equalities legislation?
Well, I mean, it's an interpretation, a radical interpretation of equalities legislation, but it may not be incompatible. I mean, it is a violation of non-discrimination. But I mean, this is really what I'm talking about is you start, I mean, affirmative action in America, for example, initially meant just taking action against discrimination against Black Americans. It eventually came to mean quotas, so that if you didn't have enough Black people that mirrored the population, you were in somehow pursuing indirect discrimination. So you start with something innocuous, tackling discrimination, and then you move to indirect discrimination, which requires you to discriminate against white people or men or whatever it is. And that's what I mean is there is this sort of stealth element that once you sign up to something that doesn't sound so bad, you then give power to administrative activists, which then will push the envelope. So, for example, harassment, you know, we can all agree that overt harassment in the workplace isn't a good thing. But because this is sort of vaguely worded, it then comes to be the point where if you criticize the Iranian supreme leader, that can be perceived as Islamophobic. And once you institute a duty, companies' incentives are to avoid lawsuits as much as possible, which means that even if it means silencing somebody's speech and criticizing the supreme leader, that's better than being sued and having to pay money. So all of these incentives push the woke agenda more and more in a creeping manner. And that's why they must be resisted. So full props really to the FSU who are doing a great job in calling this out. And hopefully the government is really going to take a tough line because we haven't seen enough action from the conservatives in just monitoring these stealth campaigns.
Well, the Free Speech Union, they just released this briefing on the subject of B Corp and ESG. And they said that 1 in 20 of their cases relates to EDI policies, the equality, diversity and inclusion policies. How much of a threat does this actually pose to freedom of speech, and particularly for those who might be making, say, innocent religious comments, or because of their religion, they take a particular position on the gender debate? How much of a threat is that going to pose to people's individual rights? How concerned should people be about this?
They should be very concerned. I've done a number of studies, large-scale surveys, one in Britain, one in the US. We found that particularly people who are politically conservative, who go through diversity training, are significantly more afraid of losing their job, losing out at work. They are reticent about criticizing a Black coworker, for example. So what this does is it actually makes race relations more tense and self-conscious. It makes people more fearful of stepping out of line, and then gets people walking on eggshells. I mean, that's a terrible way to run an organization. It's just lowering the human flourishing of our society. So yeah, it's a major threat to free speech. Not only that, some of the concepts they're totally pseudoscientific. They involve attacks on Britain, on white people, which are actually violations of the Equality Act. But of course, that until you get someone going to court on a reverse discrimination case.
Thank you very much, Professor Eric Kaufmann, and thank you very much for your time this evening. Each week on this show, we like to end with our closing prayer. This week, we are hearing during the collect for the 10th Sunday after Trinity, read by Tom from the LVS Ascot School.
Let thy merciful ears, O Lord, be open to the prayers of thy humble servants, and that they may obtain their petitions, make them to ask such things as shall please thee. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
You've been watching the Common Sense Crusade with me, Emma Webb. Next up, it's the Saturday 5, but before that, here is your weather forecast.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Marco Patagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll see a mixed bag of weather across the UK over the next few days. There'll be some sunshine, but some rain too. But things will be turning warmer, certainly towards the middle part of the coming week. Low pressure's anchored towards the northwest of the UK at the moment. That's feeding a fair few showers in on the southwesterly breeze. And we'll need to keep an eye on this little feature running in from the southwest. That'll bring some more rain on Sunday night into Monday. Back to tonight though, it's a case of clear spells and showers. The most frequent showers towards the north and west of the UK, some of them fairly heavy towards the northwest of Scotland. In the best of the clear spells down towards the southeast, temperatures holding up fairly well actually at 15 or 16 degrees and falling no lower than 13 or 14 towards the north and northwest. As for Sunday, well, it's a day of sunshine and showers. The showers most frequent and most widespread on Sunday towards the north and northeast of the UK. A few heavy, perhaps even thundery ones around here. Whereas towards the south and east, it's a brighter picture, plenty of sunny spells around. And with lighter winds than on Saturday, it should feel a bit warmer out and about, temperatures peaking at 23 Celsius, 73 in Fahrenheit. Monday, there looks like being a pretty unsettled day across England and Wales. Outbreaks of quite heavy, potentially thundery rain working in from the southwest as we go through the day. Whereas towards the north and northwest, it's a day of sunshine and showers once again. And temperatures peaking in the high teens to low 20s, 23 down towards the southeast is 73 in Fahrenheit. Warming up though as we head toward the middle of the week, we could even see 30 degrees in one or two spots.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just